Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the warm introduction. Hasn't this morning been fascinating? I've learned so much over the last hour or so. My brain's popping, so hopefully I can present some interesting ideas to round off the different elements of the panel discussion today. Before the panel discussion today, so Bill's asked me to come and talk to you about ethics and the ethics of mass data collection. I mean, could it be a larger subject to cover in a short space of time? So I'll give it a go. My name's Renata Sampson. I'm Senior Policy Advisor at the Open Data Institute. Let me put the Open Data Institute into some for you. We were founded in 2012 by Sir Nigel Shadbolt and Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who you may be familiar with. We're an international, independent, not-for-profit organisation, and we're based in London. Although, obviously, in the time of coronavirus, we're based digitally everywhere. We have a vision. Our vision is that we want people, organisations, and communities to use data to make better decisions and be protected from any harmful impacts. And our mission, the way we go about doing this, is working with companies and governments to help build and encourage an open, trustworthy data ecosystem. So part of what we do is we talk about, well, the main part of what we do is we talk about data, and not all data, as we know, is the same. This is the data spectrum. This is a tool that we use to try and encourage people to think about the different types of data that they're using. So as we note, we might be called the Open Data Institute, but actually it's not just about open data. Some data needs to be closed data. It has certain sensitivities around it. It may be national security data. It may be internal data, as we can see, about employment contracts, policies, etc., that shouldn't be shared. It should be closed. And it should be access only with certain people. Shared data is predominantly the sort of data that most of us are using, and there's been a lot of the data that we've been talking about today. This is data that's shared for purposes. It provides group-based access. There are methods and requirements and security principles in as part of the process of access and as part of the process of sharing. But predominantly, we would probably say that most data is shared. What we'd like to see, however, is for as much data as possible to be open data. That would be data that's published openly on the internet. And as we've heard earlier from Kira, that Matt from Allstate was pushing quite hard, and rightly so, for access to the data about bicycles so that he could make good decisions for himself, but also potentially build applications, tools, products, opportunities that would help society as a whole. And the more data that we make openly available, the better decision making we can have as society. We're certainly finding that right now with regards to coronavirus. And as Bill said, I've been super busy since the start of lockdown, working with organizations to try and help them make the data as open as possible, but also to start to pose the questions that are required from maybe public sector organizations to ask of the private sector to say, look, you've got some data. This might be really helpful for us right now. Can we discuss you opening it up with obviously the relevant privacy and security requirements in place? So aggregating data to make it available so that more people who you might not be aware of can have insight and derive learnings and help make better decisions. So the data spectrum is a really helpful way within any organization or just as an individual to think about different types of data. We have a tendency, I think, to see data as a bit of a blob. We talk about the data, but we very often don't define what the data is. So this is a good starting point to help with that. Part of the work that we then do is to discuss change. Now, we've had an awful lot about how change is happening all the time, but the way we think about how data should be used also needs to change. We want to see at the Open Data Institute positive impacts, the middle section of this slide, where decisions, all the things that I've just spoken about, decisions, the opportunity for creation, good stewardship, so where you collect the data from, how you manage the data, and then who you provide access of the data to, or how you can make it openly available, is the sweet point within the spectrum here of not being too data fearing, so worrying unnecessarily in some cases, but obviously necessarily in other cases, about trust in relation to data, but also then not hoarding the data. You know, we all collect masses of data, no, not all of us, lots of businesses collect a mass of data. The collection of such data might not, in your head, be relevant, or you can't see how it might work with another organization. And we find this in our work with cities. We have a cities workshop where we ecosystem map with all the different departments within a city, but also external organizations, be they academia or business or civil society, to help understand all the different actors that may be within an ecosystem space and get them to talk about the data that they have, but the data that they need and the solutions that they're trying to establish. Because most of us work within our own bubbles, and increasingly now working remotely from home, the need to talk, the need to identify where there's good data will A, stop us from hoarding it, and B, help us to face our any fears and understand better ways of being able to share or make data open by talking about it. So this is all about building trusting relationships and thinking more about different types of data that we may want or need access to. So this is kind of business orientated or organizationally orientated, but this not all just about that. I mean, a lot of the data that we've spoken about today, we've heard about from Neil and from Adrian and so on, it has been probably non-personal data. But there are also elements within a number of the presentations where we've seen actually where there's an opportunity for probably a mix with personal data. For example, we saw from Adrian that the idea of using the environmental sensors could then identify where people could find good parking spaces. You're now at a point where you're going to cross over into potentially engaging with people's personal data. So we found through research that we've done with the Royal Society of Arts and with Luminate, we went and spoke to a handful of people, and we wanted to know from them how they felt about personal data, about them being used. And what we found was that people had a very broad understanding of data, and particularly GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation. But they also have very, very, very strong emotional feelings about how they felt about data, about them being shared, when, how, and why. And from that, we developed this taxonomy, which is based solely on GDPR, but is meant to be a language that all of us in our own personal lives can adopt. So we found that personal data, the identifiers of us, our name, address, our email, our telephone number, we're mainly pretty comfortable sharing that information. We understand that we need to share that information in order to have a service provided to us. And also, whilst it's data solely about us as individuals, it's also data about others. Other people have our name, other people live at the same address as us. It's not solely ours to own. It's ours to share when we feel comfortable in doing so. Sensitive data, which would be known under GDPR as special category data, is the stuff that starts to identify us more than just the shared identifiers, but the more key elements as to who we are as a person, our gender, our race, our political memberships, our sexuality, our criminal record even. These are two areas where we both know, if you can see me right now, you've got a measure as to what my gender is, what my race is. We could have a chat about what my political persuasions may be. But this is stuff that we're obviously sharing all the time, just by being able to see eye to eye or face to face with one another. The behavioral data, however, is the area of data that we could say is fairly new to being collected. This is the stuff that's actually about the core of us inside. So before, it would be data that we would provide through a survey or a market research opportunity, and we may be able to fib about it. Yes, I love that shade of lipstick. These pair of shoes are absolutely what I'm looking for. And actually, we might not have been telling 100% the truth. But with the internet and with the ability to track us, monitor us, make decisions about us through the collection of data about us, this gives real insights into how we behave. And an awful lot of this data is data that's collected by IoT. That doesn't mean that it's bad, but it does mean that people are demonstrating to us a real nervousness about this. They understand that it can help them identify better ways of living their life or products that they may want to buy, but they feel concerned that it's being retained and used to make inferences about them that they can't challenge. And this is something that's absolutely critical in relation to the area of ethics. The final part of this graphic is what we defined as societal data. Now, this is data that is about us, but it's not data that needs to define or identify us. It's group data, if you wish. It's societal data, hence the term. It's the stuff that can be collected from IoT. If it's aggregated, it can give insights into how movements of people are working, how we're living. Census data is a perfect example of it. Demographics, travel patterns, and so on. This was the type of data that we want to see be made as openly available as possible when it's de-identified, anonymized, aggregated, etc. Is some of the data that I believe was being spoken about by Mo earlier that can be collected on AI Edge. This is data that people don't really understand is being collected about them. And this is data that they're predominantly, when asked, very happy to share and provide access to, but they need to be sure that the behaviors and the sensitivities and the identifiers are stripped out in order for them to feel comfortable about sharing it. And this has been absolutely critical. And we're seeing much more talk about this during the coronavirus situation. We're all being asked to share information about ourselves, to share data about ourselves that can help make better decisions about where there's a flare-up of the virus. Just being able to identify our symptoms, for example, doesn't need to identify Renata's symptoms, but the symptoms of people within a geographical area, and as broad geographical area as possible rather than my house on my street, is actually helping identify ways of when lockdowns can occur or be lifted, or where there might be a need for extra beds, extra staff, etc. So I'm going to use mobility data as an example of this. Mobility data from IoT mobility services does collect a lot of personal and behavioral data about us. The personal identifiers are collected when data potentially when we download an app to enable us to hire a bicycle or a scooter or whatever else. The GPS data of the vehicle is obviously going to be able to provide great insights into where the vehicle is, if it's broken down, if it's been abandoned, etc. But it also gives a great amount of detail about people's behaviors, people's habits, people's routes that they take. And we've seen that from the example that Kira gave of how people were actually using bicycles across a wider area of Belfast. And whilst what was being presented was that enabled Belfast to put in a different docking station, there is obviously a temptation to understand when people are cycling, why people are cycling, people's cycling behaviours. And I was completely fascinated by the idea that when the survey took place, that people said they used the cycle lanes, but in actual fact that they were riding on the pavement. I suspect people were saying they're using the cycle lanes because they know that cycling on the pavement is illegal, as opposed to not always having a cycle lane to do it. Lots of us have at one point or another cycled on the pavement, and we know we shouldn't. So it's perfectly reasonable to be allowed to fib, and part of the problem with the behavioural data collection is that people feel aggrieved that actually every point is always being nuanced and a decision's being made about them. So there is bias in being able to identify exactly how people are behaving, which again is an ethical consideration. So if the data, if mobility data, the personal stuff is really enticing in order to make good services and identify when people want to have a bicycle or whatever, what routes they're taking, but it can unnerve citizens because they feel as though maybe their route to work or the route to the doctor or the route to their partner or a secret that's not a detrimental secret, that a behavior may not want to be monitored. So we don't want to stop people from sharing data because the societal aspects are super helpful, but we also need to take into consideration how people feel and where their sweet and comfort spot is about the positive impact. So aggregating and anonymizing the data from mobility services has, as we're seeing with regards to coronavirus, enabled city councils and so on to make good decisions, better decisions, have greater insights into the busyness of services, economic activity, how we can increase or reduce lockdown, the spread of disease, and again, as I say, the adherence to lockdown. So the point here is that there's two conflicting elements potentially happening, and we have to be very careful whenever we're building any service or product or tool or application that we consider all of these elements together. So this is where it gets complicated. So what are the difference between ethics and morals, right? So ethics are basically the rules of conduct recognized, I'm going to read it out, recognized in respect to a particular class of human actions or a particular group or culture. This is a social system. This is about how society views right and wrong, but it's not black and white. There is no specific right or wrong. Yet ethics are governed by professional and legal guidelines. But they're constantly shifting, they're constantly changing, and people will have very different concepts of what ethics are and what ethics mean to them. And that's based on morality. We each have an individual personal morality. That is about our concepts of what we see as right and wrong. And that can change, but predominantly people will find that they do have a fixed view about certain things. So within a business organization, within the process of building a product or a tool, it's very important that people's morality is discussed, but that it is seen as a part of an ethical process, a group process of discussing not a tick box exercise, but discussing rights and wrongs, ways society thinks, how different cultures think, how people within different communities think. There is no fixed way of doing ethics, but it's important that ethics are undertaken. So the ODI likes to describe data ethics as a branch of ethics that evaluates data practices with the potential to adversely impact on people and society in data collection, sharing, and use. Now, that's pretty critical to everything that we've heard today, right? I know we've got a room full of people who are technologists, coders, data experts, policymakers, etc. Very few of us, I suspect, have had any background or training in philosophy, psychology, ethics, morality. We have an internal instinct to it, but how do we then build this into the creation of products when we're busy focusing on very specific technical solutions that need to be addressed or problems that need to be addressed? Well, this is why the ODI has created the data ethics canvas that Bill referred to at the start of this morning. This is a tool that we can come and do on, but it's also a tool that you can look at on our website. It looks like this. It's not, let me be 100% clear. You don't start at box one, circle one, data sources, and work your way around it. You jump in at a box and you discuss it with regards to your team, but also your wider team within your organization. You know, your marketing team is going to have a very different approach to your legal team, to your business development team, to your coding team, etc. But everybody's point of view is absolutely critical in being able to ask these often super difficult questions. And I'm not just saying that they're difficult because you're not necessarily going to come to an immediate and obvious answer. They're difficult because they might actually mean that the product or the service or the tool that you're developing might need to not proceed any further. You might be crossing a line that you can't square off. That if anybody were to interrogate what you were doing, would potentially find a real fundamental ethical problem within there. Now that's hard, and as I say again, it's not tick box. This is all about iteration. This is all about ongoing, constant communication, and it's about these different areas. It's about what data are you collecting, sharing, using, why, where's it coming from, what are you going to be doing with it? We've heard today about all sorts of useful ways of going about collecting data in real time. And I thought Mo's presentation was fascinating about how what you don't need just gets deleted. You take what you need from it. That's super important for some products. You need to think about the impact. You know, what is the actual impact of the service that you're developing? We can all have amazing ideas, you know, light bulb moments whilst we're stood in the shower. Oh my God, this is the solution to everything. I know how to solve the coronavirus situation. But in truth, if you don't interrogate the ethics of your amazing idea, if you don't consider what it is, how it will be used, what problems might occur from it, and that can be a dark place to wander down, but it can also then provide quite a lot of enlightenment. It's important to have that discussion. Furthermore, you need to think about engagement. I'm going to take you back to the slide that I showed you about different types of data about us. I had a very interesting conversation with Bill prior to today's session, and we talked about how the coronavirus situation has leveled up people's understanding of data that's being asked to be collected about them. I have a background in talking about privacy and security, and it's always been a challenge to think about whether people's need for that or inherent desire for that is in some way at conflict with our ability to make good decisions. The same with open, as we've said, data hoarding. If you're an organization, you've got your data, you may think, I don't want to share it out or make it open because someone might do something with it that I'm not comfortable with. These are constant conflicts, but actually we're finding that people genuinely care about what's happening with data about them, and now they understand why. And if you as an organization or you as building a product don't take into consideration that maybe you might perceive it as whimsical, emotional feelings of people, you could find yourself in a complex situation further down the line. Either that people won't want your product, or that people suddenly want insight into what's happening with data about them and how decisions are being made that you're not necessarily able to easily provide or explain. So engagement with people, transparency is really, really, really important. And finally, process. As I said, this is not a tick box exercise. We often hear process being like, great, I've done that. I've done my ethics canvas, job done, put that in the drawer until somebody asks about it. But everything is constantly shifting and changing. As Kira said, where we are now is not where we were even a year ago. And as we've seen with regards to artificial intelligence, the sudden lockdown that we've experienced internationally has meant that all the sorts of insights that were being developed through machine learning have gone skew-with in some places, because all of a sudden our behaviors are entirely different to how they have been before. So iterate, talk, build ethics into your mass data collection, but build ethics into your daily workplace conversations. Is what we're doing cool? Are we actually communicating this well? Are we talking to different parts of our organization? Are we talking to the wider community? Does it all need to be digital, or could we do an on-street survey? And what might we find out about that? Challenge your own personal biases, listen to other people, and don't be scared of asking the difficult questions. I have a couple of minutes left, but in truth, I've rattled through. We've got a lovely pink screen that brings some warmth to the next stage of proceedings. I think it would be really interesting to now take some questions and enjoy a good panel discussion. But if anybody wants to talk to us about the Data Ethics Canvas, or more broadly, our city workshops, which take into account and train people how to ecosystem map, how to do business development, public and private sector business cases, or to just sit around and have some difficult conversations that you might find enlightening within your teams, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're at the Open Data Institute. Thank you very much.